graphic artist and book illustrator based in regional Victoria who's worked with authors such as Kate Forsyth and Sophie Mason. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My first question is, what drew you to illustrating?
Oh, good question. I started out as an artist and photographer, so in my early student days I was very much a purist photographer, so it was all about the perfect black and white print, locking myself in the dark room for days and weeks at a time. And then I had kids, and you can't lock yourself away in the dark room when you have kids. So I reluctantly moved over to digital photography and then found how much I loved working with montage. So taking lots of photographs of different things and then lathering them together, which is kind of where my style and technique started. I was doing a lot of exhibitions. It's very expensive to do exhibitions. You're paying for framing and exhibition space and printing. And around the time, I've always loved books and always wanted to find a way into them somehow. I was always going to be either change the art world somehow with my art or write the greatest Australian novel. So about 7 years ago I was introduced to Kate Forsyth, and she bought a print of mine, and we got talking, and I'd been working on this project going back and finding old fairy tales and looking to retell them through exhibition prints, because I had young daughters and I was wanting to go back and find these tales that had girls and women actually doing something, actually having their own adventures. That's right.
Characters.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And with fairy tale, they were being popularised in a time when women were expected to behave a certain way, and a lot of the tales that we know now were written down by white men who were curating these stories that had been passed down for hundreds and thousands of years. But a lot of those stories survived. So I was going back and finding these tales, and it turned out Kate was doing the exact same thing, working on the exact same project, but retelling them. So I thought, we obviously have to work together, and the obvious thing is a book. But yeah, with the first book, I had already illustrated some of these stories before she'd written them, so it was sort of at the beginning of a really wonderful collaboration, which is how I still like to work now. So getting back to technique, all of my illustrations are photography, so I photograph every element in them. I could probably do. This is our latest one. And these have black and white versions of the tales, but I can do a little show and tell here. So yeah, I photograph leaves and moss and sticks and twigs, and I will lay them in Photoshop to make up dragons and griffins and horses and all sorts of other mystical creatures. Horses aren't technically mythical creatures, but unicorns could be. And photograph the people in my life and the landscape around where I live, and build all those up in Photoshop to make the final illustrations.
That links really nicely is how did you develop those skills, and what influences have shaped your techniques?
So the techniques, I've always been a photographer, so that's, I do draw, but not in the illustrative work that I do. So that's always carried through. I've always had that love of photography. So it's great to be able to use that in a way that translates to illustration.
It's interesting that you use photos to build your illustrations, because I think when people think about illustration, they typically think of an artist as like actually hand drawing and not using photos to build images.
Right. A lot of people assume that I've drawn the artwork, so trying to work out how I've done it. Like I said, I do draw a little bit, but a lot of it is stick figures. So everyone's lucky that I work with photography. But yeah, to me, it's a fantastic way of being able to build up, especially in the fairy tale work, build up these fantasy, magical worlds out of the everyday world around me. So using the Australian landscape a lot, but I also, when I can, travel overseas and take my camera and just take tens of thousands of photographs wherever I go.
Makes your soul happy.
Yeah.
You're still doing what you're
like,
with.
and I'm still working technically, so I can claim it all on tax.
Even better.
But I was in France 5 or 6 years ago now, and I was working on a collection of French fairy tales with Sophie Masson. And she'd written a version of Beauty and the Beast set in a particular castle in France. So I went there to the place where the story was set and collected leaves and twigs and bits and pieces from the actual landscape that the beast came from, and then built him up out of that landscape where the story was set. So it's just sort of this wonderful connection to place as well, and being able to use the actual places and the things from that place to illustrate the stories.
Like not just through the story, but like the images itself makes everyone have a bit more of an emotional connection to the setting.
Yeah, that's right.
What are your biggest challenges when you face when you illustrate?
Ooh, good question. Well, because it's photography, if I need a dragon, then I need to actually work out how to build it out of, again, the everyday things. So I've got a few dragons, so some made from leaves and some made from steam and smoke and flames. So at least with making those fantasy creatures, I can just kind of make it up. So probably technically the most challenging is the human characters, because I photograph, like I said, people around me, my children, their friends. So when I'm photographing them, I have to think ahead to every single pose and every single expression they might make. I could do a little bit of tweaking in Photoshop, but not too you can tell. It helps that I work in silhouette a lot as well. So, because if it was a photograph of that person in the illustration, and you could see all of their features and the colour of their clothes and their skin and eyes, then it would always be that person in the illustration. But with a silhouette, it gives the reader that kind of space to imagine themselves into the story. So I kind of feel like it makes it a bit more accessible to the reader, that you feel like like you're a part of it, you can be in there with that character, because it's not one particular photograph of a person. But yeah, the challenging thing is if I've already photographed that person and I need them to do a very specific thing,
Much more harder.
so I need to get them back wearing the same clothes, or I just kind of Frankenstein them. So I take the legs from one photograph and I just move this arm up a little bit.
How do you go about building the fantasy creatures? Do you sort of have an outline, or do you take on an actual animal from our world too?
Yeah, I do a bit of both. So with dragons, I've got lots of photographs of lizards. So I've got one in particular where I photographed autumn leaves from our backyard and graded them by colour. It's the one place in my life where I'm actually organised. And I photographed them one by one on a light box, because that's what gives me that nice clean silhouette, and it means that I can then sort of piece them together more easily in Photoshop. But kept their colour in that sort of translucent look they have. And I think it was a photograph of a Jackie lizard, which is these little tiny ones that run around at home. So I used, I think, the body, and then I had a longer tail from something else, and then I think I had a pair of bat's wings that I and other times I love working with Baba Yaga tails, which is the old witch of the forest. And I've got another illustration where I had a couple of giants sort of looming over a human-sized table. One's holding like world's tiniest glass of wine, looking very disappointed. It's a human-sized glass of wine. But for stuff like that, I'll often photograph myself in a particular pose. So, you know, my partner will often walk out into the backyard to find myself squatting in the undergrowth. And then I will use that image of myself just as a framework to see where the knees go and where my arms should be, just to kind of make sure I've got the dimensions correct in terms of where things go. And then I'll build up that witch or giant out of sticks and leaves and moss and mushroom and various things, and then take myself out again, delete that layer.
How do you ensure your illustrations tell a story or convey the intended message?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I think the important thing to remember as an illustrator is that you're always working in conversation with text. And that's not to say that we tell the same story that the text is telling. So our job as illustrators is to respond to that text and add layers of meaning and weave our own story, our own visual story through that text story. With fairy tale collections, there's only sort of 3 or 4 illustrations per story, which means I can make little vignettes and pull out details of that story that I want to highlight, which is one way that you can kind of build up that conversation. And I illustrate picture books as well, and that's a whole other form of storytelling, because you actually have to tell a complete visual narrative with your illustrations. So I'm always going back and looking at the text and making sure that I'm not being too obvious with what I'm illustrating. And sometimes you have to tell a slightly different story. Sometimes you're creating illustrations to complement the text, but sometimes you have to contrast it as well and give a reader that little surprise. So they'll read one thing but they'll see something in the illustration. And all of a sudden that, you know, blooms this whole new sort of idea within the story. So yeah, it's text for me is the first, like always that point of call that I go back to make sure, and really need to make sure that I'm helping tell that story and not hindering.
Does your process change between, say, the fairy tale collection to working with picture books?
Technically speaking, in the way that I put the illustrations together, not too much. I mean, with some of the picture books I've been using a little bit of paper collage as well, so using torn paper, or doing some cyanotypes, which is an old photographic process where you paint on the emulsion and expose it in the sun. And that way I can get some sort of painterly kind of brushwork in there. That's quite good with the picture books because it gives that sort of extra kind of painterly dimension, I suppose, and I can add some sort of sweeps of movement through the illustrations and that kind of thing. Conceptually, it's very different. With the fairy tales, I'll see an image in my mind when I'm reading the text, and right, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this one and this one. But with the picture books, I really have to storyboard first, so that's when I start drawing stick figures and just planning the flow of that visual story, because you might be working with full page spreads and then individual spots on little pages. You just need to make sure that you're not always, looking at something from the same point of view and the same perspective and the same scale. You need to sort of help that story flow. So it takes a lot more planning doing the picture books.
I guess with the picture books, it helps with the pacing, with the illustrations as well.
Yeah.
It helps move the story along as well. It's not just the text that moves it along as well.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you enjoy most about being an illustrator?
I love all of it. It's great fun. It's the best job in the world. As I guess, like a lot of people, I guess I'm an extroverted introvert. So there's nothing I love more than hiding away in my little study for days at a time and not talking to anybody and just working. And I get to go for walks and collect things and build worlds, and that's that's incredible. But then I also love coming out and doing things like book fair, where you get to talk to readers and build community, which I think is really important. So I love talking to people about books. I could talk about books to people all day long.
About books, no matter what.
That's right. So and people who work in books are just the best people in the world. So I've made so many incredible friendships and connections with people in the industry and readers as well. So it's kind of built this wonderful life that I'm very grateful for.
Do you have any advice for aspiring illustrators looking to break into?
Bad news is, for introverts, as a lot of us tend to be, as I was hinting at just then, is that you need to talk to people.
Can't just think right away.
So I've had 17 books published now, and I think almost every single one came out of a conversation with somebody, whether that was talking to another writer, an author, or happening to talk to the right publisher at the right time at an event. They're not going to know you exist if you haven't shown them that you're in the world. And you never know when, someone might have spoken to you at an event last week and then had a project laid on their desk and think, I've got just the right person. I was just talking to them. They gave me their card. So, and it can be hard actually, approaching people. I completely get it. I still find that hard. Just a few days ago, I approached an author who I knew of, and just went up and said, "Hi, I'm Lorena Carrington. Just letting you know how much I love your work." And I'm like, "I know who you are." What are you talking about? I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot." But that, it's always hard to do that. I think it's worthwhile. But if that is hard, then the online community is amazing as well. And if you can sit there and spend an hour crafting the perfect 2-sentence DM, at least you've got that.
You got there.
Do that. And you can find the most amazing communities online too. So talk to people, and of course work on your craft and do it every day. And remember that being a good illustrator isn't the same thing as being a good artist. You can be the most incredible artist in the world and a terrible illustrator, because your job as an illustrator is to collaborate and work with text. In books, anyway. You're not the star, and the writer's not the star either. It's this incredible thing that you're creating together. This book takes effort from both sides and flexibility, and with the way I work anyway, I insist on being very collaborative with my writers. In the past, I think a lot of publishers really wanted to keep a distance between the author and an illustrator, which thankfully isn't the case quite so much anymore. So if I get paired with an author, I will instantly email them and say, "Hello, I'm your best friend now." For the next 6 months.
I want to have a conversation and collaborating. You need to work together.
Yeah, that's right. You just have to remember that you're telling a visual story. You're not just making nice pictures.
No matter how good they are.
That's right.
And my final question is, who has been the biggest supporter of your illustrating?
Oh, I've got so many. Of course, my family, my partner. I wouldn't be able to do what I do without my partner in so many ways, practically speaking, and in his support as well. And also, to be honest, financially as well, because, working in books doesn't necessarily make you millions, especially in the early years. And even if you do well with one book, you might, make a living wage for a while, but you won't necessarily the next financial quarter. So it's like, until you can build up a really good backlist and get the chance to teach a lot of work. That's where a lot of authors make their money, is teaching workshops and giving talks and that kind of thing, until you can really build up that which is hard for a lot of people because it doesn't leave a lot of space for doing the actual creative work. So yes, it can be a job that needs a lot of privilege, really, because if you can't afford to put all of your time into illustrating because you have to work, then that's, it's very difficult. So anyway, long story short, thank you to James. But in the industry, I think it's such a supportive industry. I mean, it's everyone is the most wonderful support of each other. Specifically, I wouldn't be here without Kate Forsyth because it was through her that I got into working with books, and we've done 5 or 6 books together now. I also work with Sophie Masson, who's incredible. I've worked on a couple of collections with her. I've worked on 2 picture books, and she also runs a publishing house called Christmas Press, and she's hired me commissioned me to do quite a few covers. So, Victor Kelleher is writing books again, and I get to do all of his covers. So yeah, there's no way I can point out one person. It's just in the industry, it's just everyone. It's just incredible. 95% of people want, we all want everyone else to thrive as well, because the Australian book industry is pretty small.
Yes.
Everyone gets to kind of know each other, and you want to be a good citizen, and you want everyone else to do well too. So.
Definitely, especially like this weekend, you can see everyone talking and communicating something fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. Job weekend.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun.